So hello everyone and welcome to this keynote session and Q&A session sponsored by HAUD and co-hosted by us, Carry Community. We are proud to welcome HAUD team here who will have a very interesting discussion to share. So stay tuned and enjoy. And also towards the end, you will be able to ask the question using the chat box. So yeah, don't hold back and ask your questions and HAUD team will answer you. So now over to you, HAUD team. Tom, maybe you want to start by introducing you.
Absolutely. Thanks for the intro. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on moving beyond traditional A2P SMS monetization. And really, we're going to look at how to build a road to sustainable revenue growth. Today, you've got myself, Tom Barter, current marketing director here at HAUD. Got, of course, Joanna Kulugowska, head of market intel, and then Ron Bonici, VP of products. I don't know if, do you want to give you a small introduction yourselves?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Joanna Kulugowska. I head up global market intelligence at HAUD. Really pleased to be here today and yeah, looking forward for this discussion.
Hi everyone, I'm Ron Bonici. I've been at HAUD 6 years plus now. I had the product team and pre-sales team, so I'm also very excited and thrilled to share my experience on this webinar today.
Brilliant. So let's just jump straight into it. So a question to you, Joanna. Let's kick it off. So essentially, many of you here who are on the webinar have increased your A2P SMS revenue, your prices in the last 3 years. In fact, probably this year alone. Joanna, what effect has this had on the industry?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That certainly has been a big surge in A2P pricing over the last 2 years and especially last year. Just want to put it into perspective that the average international MNO termination rate increased in the last 2 years from a little over $3 to almost double, so over 6 cents. So on average, the international termination rate globally by market increased by 66%, but in some specific countries, geographies, even well over 100%. That obviously has an effect on the industry as a whole. So the main trends, the main effects that we have seen, of course, is that the price increases and higher rates really incentivize bypass through grey routes and race of grey routes, especially through SIM boxes in markets where SIM boxes are actively present. There has also been a shift into some alternative channels, alternative to SMS. I will name here, obviously, voice channels as very prominent in the last year. So voice OTP, so shift of verification use cases into voice OTP authentication, flash call authentication, but also moving into other channels, non-SMS, non-voice based OTT channels, for instance, in specific geographies where this could be into WhatsApp or some other OTTs that have significant presence and penetration in respective markets. Other trends that I can mention here is that in some markets where the rate has increased significantly, there has been a further erosion of on some use cases, especially of a lower priority use cases, which resulted in what we see today, especially on the international A2P side, is that the main use case on the international A2P side is verification. It's actually estimated as announced by Mobile Squared recently at around 90%. So 90% of the international traffic is now contributed to authentication. That, of course, brings a big dependency of the international A2P on the verification use case. And the last trend that I want to mention, which obviously is a result of those price increases, is that it has had a big impact on the brands and what they spend on A2P SMS. And because there has been an impact to their budgets, we're talking about an increase of 100% in some markets, especially in large markets. It has a big impact on the budgets of big enterprises. The enterprises started reviewing the use cases and potentially looking into dropping, reducing traffic into specific use cases that they're using A2P for.
It's really interesting. Ron, what are your views on the new forms of authentication?
Yeah, I agree with Joanna. I think the pricing is the main culprit here, right? So it created a lot of, it created an avalanche effect, you know. So we've seen the AIT, the trashing, and then brands reacting to that, you know, some group, like Joanna mentioned, cases being dropped, the traffic going down, you know. So all this is a reaction to the pricing that has been going on these last few years, you know. And then we see also a shift towards flash calls, which is basically one of the topics, I think, hot topics that has been discussed lately. And I mean, as you know, HAUD has already developed a solution, which we can talk maybe a bit later on the flash call part, you know, but still, this is to continue to monetize and increase the revenues when it comes to the SMS part. So I think, again, like I said, is the pricing there, we need to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, we all know that a price increase is basically the first step to true monetization, right? So the real problem we see in the market is that obviously costs can rise, use cases are being eroded. So Joanna, what's the right way of implementing a price increase?
We very often get this question from our customers, and that's something that you know, myself and my team, we work very closely with our customers and partners. So when looking to increase the rate for the A2P SMS termination, mobile operators should firstly consider their specific market elasticity, taking into account the market size and that specific operator market share as well, and looking into what are the other MNOs in the market already charging for SMS termination. And we can talk about a few scenarios here. We might be looking at the operator that is currently not monetizing at the market rate. So increasing the rate is less disruptive in a way because the market rate is already at a certain rate. So the operator is following the market trend. But of course, if we're talking about being a pioneer in price increase, that has to be, you know, done with caution. And also looking into this intelligence, this global intelligence, what are other regions, similar economies charging for A2P termination is very important. And also looking into their respective traffic profiles as well. It's important to see, have they seen any significant traffic erosion, any specific erosion in some use cases. That might be the indication that the rate is already at a very high point and the traffic is not increasing, but decreasing, if you will. And the next thing to really take into account is the, so to speak, go-to-market strategy with this price increase. And the right way. So nowadays, the brands are really looking, we spoke about the budget impact on the brands. So the brands are really looking into pricing stability. Because of that frequent price increase is really impacting the budgets. It is important to make sure that the price changes and market shifts are communicated well in advance, so that that the wholesale industry and the market, including also the brands itself, can prepare and plan for that market increase. As you know, these sudden price increases, in our experience and observations, they tend to, in a way, disrupt the market and create a panic mode that really incentivizes a lot of bad behavior, such as traffic trashing and dumping the traffic, and to avoid, for instance, making a loss in the trading environment. And that, of course, impacts subscriber experience.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I find how a simple price increase can impact so many different stakeholders. So, and on that note, Ron, what kind of stakeholders should you really consider when you're implementing a price increase?
Very good question, Tom. Yeah, I think first and foremost, let's keep in mind the new channels, right, that are coming and launching new business pricing models. You know, like we have the WhatsApp lately have launched their own pricing model. We have Viber, we have RCS, and we have, don't forget, Apple Business Chat as well. So all these which are already providing brand messaging, right? So it's kind of now it's kind of a free market, right? So it's a price war. Okay, so who can win this is based on the right pricing strategy. So again, it is very important and vital that we, as stakeholders in the SMS business, especially messaging business, have the right pricing strategy. How can we define this pricing strategy? So there needs to be a framework, right, based on the market data that John has shared, right? And first and foremost, again, let's keep in mind that any disruption, any increase, obviously brands will look at, they have budgets like everybody else at every other company, you know, so they want to stick to their budget. As soon as they hit a certain threshold, they will look elsewhere. So again, pricing stability, you know, you have to have certain level of commitments with these brands, you know, to keep them as stable as possible. I don't believe that there should be a one-size-fits-all strategy. So there needs to be, again, depending on the market you are operating in, so the market economy, the elasticity that Joanna mentioned, the subscribers ARPU needs to be considered as well, right, with the country. Where are we doing business? Is the country purchasing power, you know, the standard of living of that particular country, for example, you know. So for example, even for the domestic brands, how to sell the enterprise. And even the message per se, you need to put a value on that message. So am I protecting something? Am I protecting my bank account? Am I protecting my social media? Or even healthcare, you know? So all this have different weight to the whole pricing strategy, in my opinion. And finally, I would say, like again, I mean, no big secret WhatsApp are doing, and we've been preaching this for quite some time now, right? Differentiate charging. So you have to put different pillars, right? So you put these type of messages under different categories, and then you could really put some value on these messages, basically.
So what I really want to know right now is then, how do you know that you've reached a price ceiling? What are the symptoms?
First of all, the traffic is not growing anymore, yeah, or even dropping. So one of the symptoms would be definitely if an operator is experiencing traffic drop. That's an imminent signal that you know, there has been a change, and that can be related to pricing, of course. There are some other signals that are maybe a little bit more difficult to spot and less imminent. So definitely increased bypass and fraud. It's not a secret that if the rate increases, there's a bigger incentive for the wholesale community to try to find any leakage and any loopholes in the network, vulnerabilities, and expose and misuse them. And also there is very often this behavior of and these days we see traffic trashing, even that is not so easy to spot, and blending with non-working routes. The other symptom is, I spoke about this just a moment ago, when an operator sees a decay or erosion of some specific traffic streams, namely traffic coming from the brands that may be of a lower priority. So again, we're talking about this dependency on the verification on the 2FAs, the OTP messages, and the notification, sort of more marketing content and engagement, re-engagement content is starting to disappear and shift into other channels. Yeah, and those channels can be, for instance, brands shifting into email. I mean, email still these days is the biggest channel for business communication. As much as we like to think SMS is huge, this email that is the brand's champion, yeah, but also other channels. mobile operator channels such as the voice, and we spoke about voice OTP and flash calling, and then there is the OTT channel as well. So these are the symptoms that are maybe not so easy for every operator to see, but these are the symptoms that are clearly alluding to the fact that the rate is already at the high level.
Ron, is there a way to spot these symptoms at all?
Yeah, it's a continuous work, right? So from our end, we have different teams. So we have our managed services team, which actually is always on the go testing these markets we are in, right? So looking at testing the application, looking at the performance, different behaviors. Okay, as soon as they spot something new, that is recorded to the product team, and together with our R&D, will look into these new threats. Okay, for example, flash calls behavior has been changing lately, some stuff like this. On top of that, obviously, we have our business intelligence and our analytic tools, okay, which again, based on the information that we receive together with some data sets that we have, we process, right, and come up with different type of trends, market trends, okay. And on top of that, what we're doing at the moment as well, always enhancing, is basically trying to categorize as much as possible this traffic to see and be able to analyze, right, the traffic legitimacy, okay, the channels that is being received from, and the different type of behavior of certain numbers, right, something like this.
So I can see that we've got a few questions coming into the
Some
chat.
interesting questions, I think.
Yeah. But perhaps we'll come on to them in just a minute. But here's a bold question. First of all, should we move away from the concept that an SMS firewall is just for protecting subscribers? Is it now more of an enforcement tool to enable monetization?
Can I jump on that?
Go on.
I think it's one of my favorite questions. Used to be very different before. Nowadays, they are equally important, right? So intrinsically linked, we call them. So this, because one leads to the other, right? So we've seen smishing rising, especially during COVID times, so I don't say that this should be only for monetization or only for security. I think you need to have a firewall, you need to make sure that the operator has a firewall that can handle both, right? And on top of that, if you can, which also gives you additional benefit, if you can differentiate the charging, then you have different use cases that you can actually put on top of that. I think I answered your question. I don't think that we should call this a firewall or enforcement. It's one solution for me too.
Yeah, okay. That's super interesting. Thanks, Ron. So before we move away from price increases, because it's such a hot topic, we've got a few questions. First of all, could you please clarify who performs SMS traffic pumping and trashing? Is it the aggregators?
I don't know, maybe Ron, you can comment. Maybe I can maybe start that. When it comes to SMS traffic pumping, there are different terminologies these days in the market being used, artificial inflation of traffic. There are different types of this inflation that can happen in the market. There is this sort of a natural inflation of A2P SMS that is coming from the social media bot industry, that is happening a bit outside of our industry, and our industry has been benefiting from this increase of traffic, because obviously you can buy a follower or 1 million followers for not a lot of money these days in most of the social media platforms. So these are fake accounts that don't have any ARPU for the OTT. So that's one way some traffic inflation can happen. But there has been the behavior of what we very often refer to traffic pumping, that is driven by the wholesale industry. And there are some aggregators or wholesale players in the value chain that are responsible for the generation of the traffic. And again, they can be very different. It's very interesting. Maybe I'll let Ron comment a little bit, as he's much more technical than me. What kind of scenarios maybe do we see on the AIT side, Ron?
Yeah, I mean, we can go into that. I think the main thing that we need to discuss here is, again, having the right pricing strategy, right? So as soon as a wholesale company, aggregator, who has commitments, and all of a sudden there's a disruption, they have to fulfill those commitments. You understand? So even if sometimes certain commitments are not reachable, you know, so even comes a bit on the operator side to have a more realistic targets, right? A realistic strategy here. Okay, so there are different types of artificial traffic inflation, you know, so bots sending and receiving messages, some of these are being trashed, so the aggregator keeps the money. You know, we've also seen in past webinars, also some other competitors have shared that, for example, you can also inflate traffic or charge extra for premium rated numbers, for example, you know, so you send messages and then you receive these kind of messages at a higher rate, right? So all these activities, nefarious activities, to continue to increase the revenue. But then again, if the pricing is right, you try to minimize as much as possible these attacks, right, or threats, you know.
And if I can add something here, I know that we should move on. We have other topics, but it's very interesting. So when we look at what happened in the market in the last, how the market has changed, is that a lot of operators started implementing SMS firewalls, and a lot of operators also took the route to sort of outsource or appoint single gateways, a single point of entries into the network. And that obviously is a very lucrative sort of arrangement for any aggregator that wants to have this purchase power of collecting traffic for a single market. Obviously, there's a lot of competition in this space, so these contracts tend to expire within 12 months, the commitments, and then there has to be another party who has to come with a higher commitment in a way. And in order to win a certain exclusivity, when the operator already has been monetizing the traffic that is fully present, sometimes the only way is to commit to more revenue, and sometimes this revenue is generated artificially. So to answer the question of Laurentius, it's mainly SMS aggregators who are responsible for the SMS traffic pumping.
Why have prices increased so much? Maybe 20 seconds.
It's easy to increase the revenue, right?
Yeah, but I think because it's the easiest way to increase the revenue is simply to increase the price. So as we know, operators are and there are big enterprise organizations that have budgets and quotas every year. So the A2P revenue line is maybe not so significant in the greater portfolio of operator services. So the easiest way to go forward and increase the revenue by X% is basically to charge for the asset X% more. So that is the main driver why the pricing has increased. Basically, operators don't see other easy ways to achieve greater revenues from that particular asset.
So we've kind of discussed how price increases are a great way to start off your monetization strategy, get it up and running. But as we've discussed, every message has a price ceiling. So how can we move beyond the crutch of just continuous price increases?
Yeah, I think just for what I said, the operators have to, in a way, stop looking at simply increasing rates as the only way to increase the revenues coming from the SMS channel. So when we look at the SMS as mobile operator asset, even though it's a relatively old technology, the pricing model is very outdated. It's simply transactional charge that does not reflect the complexity and the use cases and the value that the channel brings. So we strongly believe that operators need to look into new pricing models following the other business messaging channels and looking to reflect, actually to increase the elasticity of pricing of A2P messaging to really reflect the value. And as well to reduce the dependency of the A2P on the verification use case and to stimulate creating new use case for when at the moment SMS is not being used for. But because the potential is there, it's clearly there. Yes, even though we're talking about the market increasing and increasing year on year for what is now estimated at, I think, 5% on average globally, we need to remember that it's still a relatively niche channel because only less than 10% of businesses are using A2P SMS as a channel for business communication. So the potential is huge, but in order to compete with the other channels, such as email, I mean, I spoke about email maybe 10 minutes ago, it's just the charge is not comparable at all. Yeah, so that therefore SMS needs to adapt the pricing model.
Yeah, if I continue on this, I think the previous question ties well with this, right? We talked about adding the revenues because that's the easy way. I believe that the operator needs to be having more a long-term messaging strategy, and I call it messaging strategy, right? So it's not only an SMS strategy. So as we highlighted, right? So there are different type of use cases that potentially, if the operator has the aptitude, right, to do this, there could potentially be a huge amount of messages, SMS messages, that those use cases which are missing. I'll give you an example, a right personal example. Happened to me a few days ago. I was on an airline flight. I was at one of the airports, right, in Rome, and we've been hit by a storm, and the plane landed in a different airport. You can imagine, we're waiting at the gate. I receive an SMS stating, "Oh, your flight has been diverted to Fiumicino because of the bad weather." But I was one of the few who actually received the message. The others were all anxious, what's happening here, you know? So you can imagine the anxiety and the brand not reaching out to the customers. What happened to their flight? It's 7 o'clock in the evening. It's 7 o'clock. There's no flight happening. We were not being informed what is happening, you know? So that message has a lot of value, okay? To top that up is that the airline, right, did send me, in fact, a message, not only on my SMS, but only in my, as well in my application and in my email. However, being a person, a geek like I am, I hate notifications on my phone because they clutter my screen. I don't really want to be disturbed as much as possible. So I turn off these notifications. So I couldn't have seen neither the email nor the in-app message, you know? And these use cases happen every time. I'm sure everybody here has encountered these. I had the same experience with a fintech company, for example. I started a discussion on a chatbot. I left the chatbot, and all of a sudden, an hour later, I remember, and the session has been closed. Imagine the frustration, you know? So all these builds up, you know? A simple message which costs nothing to the enterprise could easily, satisfy or engage customers, brands, customers, and keep them more happy, I believe.
I can see that you're like really enthusiastic about this, Ron. Probably more from your experience this weekend with.
Yeah, across. I mean, happened to us as well in one of these cities, right, in London, when we were booking for a table, and they messaged us that the table is ready, you know. So they didn't lose the table. I did not lose my appointment. I could easily roam around the London city, you know, without having to queue for an hour for the table. You know, these customer experiences are priceless, you know, because I'm sure the restaurant has made much more money than these SMS, trust me. You know,
and that's when we talk about the value, yeah, that the
Exactly.
message brings to the brand. Just, yeah, super interesting. That's why SMS has such a big potential to grow. But yes,
the attitude needs to come from the operator, though, right? Needs to come
at the
from
price
the
that the brand is willing to pay, isn't it? And
Exactly.
reflecting the value. Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%.
So hopefully that answered your question as well around what would alternative business use cases be. So Joanna, let's say you've got a next-gen firewall in place, of course, HAUD's next-gen firewall in place. what sort of this gives you visibility of everything that's across your network, of course. So what sort of granular data, what sort of level of data should you be looking at? How do you use this data?
So once you have the visibility of what's passing through your network, you can then categorize all the messages passing through. Yeah. So you see to a very detailed granularity of what the brands, what type of patterns, categories are the brands sending. So you might see traffic coming from one connection and one brand that is sending ODP, but also engagement traffic, marketing traffic. So these messages can be all categorized in the system and as a result, reported on and charged and billed at a different rate. So for instance, let's take an example. Perhaps an operator can take a decision that and please do not hold me responsible on the rates. I'm just putting it in the model. So there's a certain brand, and maybe let's say Amazon, yeah, for instance, and the Amazon is paying. It's okay to pay 9 cents for an OTP message, and then for the same brand, Amazon can be charged for very different type of messages, such as maybe abandoned cart notification. So, hey, you didn't check out your purchase, which is still a relatively valuable use case for a brand trying to incentivize the customer to go back and actually buy something. So they can maybe charge a lower rate. Maybe it's say 6 cents is acceptable. Like I said, the number is just an example here. And then there are the other lower marketing use cases, such as promotional traffic or some kind of marketing engagement, that this rate will just not fly simply for the brand. But these can also be categorized and charged in whether very simple models or quite complex models, and maybe Ron can talk about a bit more about the actual complexity of differentiated pricing. But it can be as simple as just charging different price points for different categories of messages, or it can be more complex as well, Ron, isn't it?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, this was one of the big headaches, right, for categorization. We've seen a lot of, how can I say, we had to overcome issues like the content privacy issue, right? So you cannot look at the content. So we have developed a categorization, I call it categorization box, right? So it's an AI box based on machine learning. So we feed this box with different data sets, right? Various data sets from different sources, okay, to come up with different categorization categories, basically. Yep. So that's what we do. And this categorization box, we use it both with our enforced solution, right, for protecting and monetizing and securing the network, and then also for our exchange, which is the trading wholesale platform, right? So as Joanna is mentioning here, especially when it comes to differentiated charging. Okay, so we categorize different traffic, and accordingly, there would be a price tag assigned to each and different category. Another thing that we are doing is basically for certain, we know, for example, EU, right, the data privacy issue is quite on top of the agenda. Thus, how we are categorizing is based on registering sample text, for example. Yeah, so there's different pricing models that you can adopt based on when you onboard new brands or enterprises. Yeah, so there are different methods how we are tackling this on different type of solutions, basically, hot solutions.
So those are real useful practical steps to sort of consider when thinking about differentiated pricing. But really, how do we take differentiated pricing to market? What are the complexities involved with running direct to brand SMS operations and controlling your network traffic more directly?
As I explained, I mean, you need to have all this. You need to have, we call it the A2P monetization solution suite, right? So you need to have the right technology in different areas. So basically, when you are to enforce, you need to have proper enforcement, right? And as Joanna mentioned, we categorize the traffic, international, domestic, different type of brands, sets. There's a lot of business rules, right, that we implement in the machine to make sure that the traffic is flowing from the correct channels. But that's not only for enforcement, and to charge is basically to say, listen, if this is of this type, then you can apply this type of charge. So these are all different permutations that you can do on the actual platform. Okay.
Interesting. Joanna, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think the technology piece is very important because you ask about the challenges what are the challenges, complexities involved with running direct campaigns. So it's even though the MNOs have a really incredible brand value that is recognized by enterprises internationally and globally, they are traditionally not so well equipped to serve the enterprise. It's not their core business. Therefore, that ideal scenario, whereas MNO is connected directly to the brand and there is direct engagement and direct conversation, is not always the case. So the operators rely on SMS aggregators to bring the traffic in because there are just simply also too many brands in the world for an operator to connect. And even there's a complexity for MNO to manage many aggregators. Some operators therefore simplify it and try to limit the number of partners to 2, 3, 1, 10, depending on what actually their wholesale team can manage. Yes, because operators have relatively small resources usually dedicated to this specific P&L, if you will. And there is complexity managing a wholesale business without the right solution in place. Yeah, that's starting from simply signing the agreement to establishing the connection, but then visibility of the traffic, routing of the traffic, billing and invoicing. So yeah, these are not easy for the operators to overcome. And therefore, I agree with you, Ron. This is the technology piece in place that makes a difference here.
Cool, thanks. So we've looked at two great ways of evolving your monetization strategy, right? We've got the first step of price increases, and then we've got a more advanced level of differentiated pricing. However, I'm really keen to understand in the ever-changing landscape of mobile messaging and SMS, how has it changed in the past year, in the past 5 years?
5 years. Yeah, a lot has changed. Yeah, let me take it up. Since I'm the furniture in the messaging industry. So 5 years would be like half of what I spent in the industry, as I think approaching. I keep on saying 10 years for a while now, so I think I've exceeded the 10 years mark, but okay, let's not go there. What has happened in the last 5 years? So first of all, we need to talk about the boom, yeah? So the pandemic, COVID-19. I think we all said it so many times, and but we have to re-emphasize that because of COVID-19 pandemic, like when the whole world turned online, SMS has gone from being sort of a niche channel to a mainstream channel that has gained suddenly a lot of popularity because it was used for critical communication, and that has really turned it to this really established, secure, and trusted channel for critical communication, but also when all the businesses turned online, it was also a very convenient way for businesses to interact with the customers when the shops were closed, etc., etc. This rapid digitalization really has put a lot of pressure on enterprises to embrace the mobile first. So yeah, that definitely happens. So a lot of operators globally have seen an increase of traffic, or A2P traffic on domestic, on international sites. So there has been the big boom. I call it the big boom, and that growth continued post-pandemic as well. But alongside that growth of use cases, that there was also this negative effect, that was the increase in fraud and smishing that happened. Yeah, so everyone turned online, as did the fraudsters, because they also had to find a niche to survive and prospects in this digital situation. So there has been a big surge on smishing, flu-bot. Suddenly SMS gained a lot of negative popularity or fame for being the channel that is, insecure or really infested by smishing. We have to remember, I think there's an extremely interesting presentation from Nick Lane recently, that even though we talk about fraud, and fraud is very close to our hearts in the industry, SMS is still a relatively clean channel if we compare to email and other channels. But yes, there has been a lot of fraud, and so the result of this was the operators started taking actions to protect their subscriber, meaning they started implementing firewalls, anti-spamming solutions, different type of solutions to reduce that impact of fraudulent messages on their subscribers. Another trend is that MNOs have started or have been realizing the A2P revenue opportunity more and more, and therefore they started implementing monetization strategies. Also because of trends such as the roaming traffic being very impacted in pandemic, data going down. A2P was the only growing channel out of their assets. Therefore, they definitely put more attention to it and consider it more strategically. Then another going back to this trend, and we see operators implementing firewalls and monetization strategies, and definitely the trend in the last 3-4 years is more and more operators started implementing sort of commitment models, exclusive partnership models. We've seen, I've spoke about this before, but that was definitely another trend. And then I think we covered quite well today, especially in the last 2 years, the rates started increasing as a knockdown effect of this. Especially on the international side, but in some markets also on domestic side. And we spoke about the effects of it. But if I would look back for taking the pricing aside, maybe the last 16 months, it's definitely been a big surge in those bad behaviors, artificial traffic inflation, trashing, blending, those more impactful wholesale fraud types. That I think that's summarize my take. I mean, 5 years is a lot to cover, so I try to focus on the major trends. But yes, it's an ever-changing, dynamic market. So I only try to highlight the big trends I've seen, but I could probably talk for 10 hours about this.
Thanks, Joanna. Ron, it's time to get out your crystal ball then. I'll flip the question on the other way.
Oh, so, you get the future question, thank God.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you predict will happen in the next 5-10 years even?
It's easier to predict the past, John, and then the future.
Yes.
Yeah, but we see you're still enthusiastic about this market actually. So, yeah, let's start with what I would like to see personally, right? So, I mean, what future would bring and what would be nice to have. So it would be nice to have one kind of expert application where I can have all my loyalty cards, because I have, like I said, I don't know how many apps, I don't know how many cards, and then my wallet separately, stuff like that. I've seen this before, right? So you have everything in there. You have your tickets. I can go buy my ticket, put it directly in my wallet, so I can go to the airport, sell them my ticket. Everything is hassle-free. We know now time is of the essence, as we say, right? So as we go, I mean, time is also value. So even to communicate directly with the brand over there, receive promotions, I can complain easily there, stuff like that. So how can we achieve this though, right? So I would like to dissect this, right? So there are different type of technologies. There's a massive amount of different type of levels that we have to look into. right? So let's start from the messaging part, and I call it messaging. Yeah. So I believe messaging will continue to grow, right? So I think that is the favorite, at least for me and a lot of people that I know, is the most. I mean, this is the favorite way to interact with the brands. You know, messaging is the easiest way. You know, so SMS is there, and I think will remain for quite some time. If again, as we said earlier, we are able to put the right use cases in place. Okay, I think SMS is here to stay for the long time. Okay, so apply differentiate charging, and that would be my first point. Second point, as I said, customer preference, different type of interactions, different type of channels. Then we're talking about the omni-channel, right? So you need to have a platform that enables you to have different type of channels you can reach out to the from the brand to the customer and the customer to the brand on different type of channels. So that is something that also needs to be taken into consideration. That's my point number 2. Point number 3 would be to identify who's behind the device. So you need to verify who's actually doing this transaction, who's behind the actual mobile device. You know, need to verify it and authenticate this person. Now we're also talking about the metaverse. You know, so verification is also becoming quite important. That's my point number 3. And finally, something that we've seen that even GSMA are trying to push is for operator to remain relevant. I believe they need to provide additional value to the brands. And how can they do this? I personally believe, coming from 16 years of experience in a mobile operator company, they're sitting on a lot of data, right? So within the limits of the data privacy, but I believe the network operators have data that they can provide back to the brands to provide additional value. Okay, and that would be operators remain relevant in this whole value chain. And that would be my point number 4.
Thanks to be so.
Did I summarize?
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. So
good, crystal ball.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, and a lot of opportunities from other channels. But I think it's really important to start with the current hot topics. So I'm going to bring it up. Let's start with flash calls. How can this be an opportunity to monetize?
It's an interesting question. It's flash call, very, like you said, it's a very hot topic right now, but it's not easy at the moment for operators to monetize it. This is because it's a highly unregulated, very gray area at the moment when we talk about flash calls. Some say that flash call is how A2P was 10 or 15 years ago, but I don't quite agree. But yes, there's a lot of question marks and uncertainties around flash call. First of all, it's not considered as fraud by any regulations, so it's not something that operator can easily just even detect, but not easily blocked. It has in the view of some regulators or some operators, it reassembles maybe some types of voice fraud, but it's at the moment not classified at all as, for instance, fraudulent. Therefore, there's no framework, or it's not classified as a transaction such as SMS or MMS or RCS. It's a flash call, it's a missed call. We call it flash call in the industry because that's the terminology we adapted for obviously the CPaaS players who are offering that as a verification method. Yeah. And because most of the operators are unable to see it or detect it or distinguish what is a flash call, what is a missed call, what is a voice call, is quite complex, obviously. Therefore, it's not charged, and they don't have the easy ability to charge that type of traffic. Where again, there's no framework for it. So, and because of that, it's close to free of charge for the brands to use or for the aggregators to sell. Which means that obviously it's at the moment treated as a point of leakage and point of bypass to deliver traffic to the networks. Now, the interesting question is, what if the operators can actually detect and charge this, will this still be such a, and charge it, for instance, at the same level they are charging as a verification transaction, a similar rate as SMS, will it still be such a relevant channel? Because when we look at the experience of the flash call for verification, it's not necessarily seamless, because it is fragmented between the different operating systems. Yeah. So, like I said, some operators are taking measurements to maybe detect it or block it, but we don't see operators at the moment really globally at a larger scale monetizing it, but it can certainly become an opportunity.
So that's the theory, but what's the reality? What's the approach HAUD are taking with this, Ron?
I mean, we have developed our own flash calls, not flash call zone, right? So it's a voice OTP solution, and it's more of a voice fraud solution. I think we need to build a framework around this, another framework, right? So start from, as Joanna said, you need to have an A2P voice agreement, so what would be the agreement here? So that needs to start. That's the first thing, secondly, then you need to be able to profile this call. So our solution, how does it work? So basically, the way we developed it is that we have a detection platform, right, with different profiles, with different voice profiles, we call them, right? So what makes a flash call? What makes a voice OTP? And these different characteristics that actually defines a flash call. Since we've been in operations, we have also seen changes in the behavior of a flash call. So the way, again, as I mentioned, is that we can load different type of profiles of the same type of activity. So I say different markets might have different type of behaviors. Okay, so the solution is quite dynamic to be able to load different profiles, and obviously the next step would be to detect these, right? Because without detection, you cannot really charge it. You need to make sure you detect it and make sure that you can charge it accordingly. Okay. And on top of that, then you need to have an enforcement, because I need to make sure that if I'm starting to charge flash calls now, I don't have any leakages, So that is the solution. And on top of that, okay, we also provide, we need to provide as well billing and invoicing, right? So you need to bill and invoice accordingly based on different type of traffic. So being SMS, being voice, different type of traffic.
Thanks, Ron. We're almost there, but I think it'd be amiss not to discuss or very quickly raise WhatsApp, of course. So WhatsApp is another channel which is featuring in discussions around the world at the minute. So could you set the scene about this potential threat, Joanna?
Yeah, WhatsApp is I think one of my favorite topics to talk these days. It's definitely the fastest growing rich media, rich messaging channel, as reported, by all the main analysts of the industry. There has been a big surge in the adoption of WhatsApp globally. I think we're talking well over 2 billion users these days, which makes it it's a very rich channel, easy to use. Most geographies are very much used to it. It is facing still fragmentation in some markets, but it's already a very, very large channel and rich. So it's an important part of the CPaaS, obviously, strategy. And if we are looking at what WhatsApp have been doing, of course, it's a big topic covered very much in different sessions these days. The change of the pricing model into the use case, a value-based charging model that also lists authentication as one of the use cases. It obviously makes it an imminent rival or competitor to humble A2P, and an interesting one as well. So obviously how this will, how the adoption will evolve. We have to see, like, all the technologies take time to adopt, but what we know from WhatsApp's behavior and the strategy they seem to be displaying, so they're quite now focused on further expanding their and strengthening their position in the business messaging industry. So also talking or approaching the brands directly and actively promoting their channel. But I have to mention here that what we have been seeing a lot is that WhatsApp, as any other channel, is not immune to fraud. So we've seen a surge of termination using WhatsApp, but that's not through the WhatsApp official business APIs. It's more of a sandbox-like behavior on WhatsApp. And I think across all the markets, but certainly here in UK, there has been a big surge on smishing as well on WhatsApp, and all kinds of spam, and that puts also WhatsApp under certain scrutiny on how will they enforce security on the channel that is, let's face it, encrypted by design.
Ron, can we turn this into a monetization opportunity?
Good question. I'll continue with what Joanna was saying. I mean, we've mentioned this multiple times. Yes, so any communication channel, especially those which are trusted by the users, are still subject to these type of threats, right? So, I think if you look at, I mean, you should not look at people like us who are used in this business, right? So we know what a sender ID is. I know I can verify that a message has been received from a verified brand. You have to look at people like my parents, for example. No, they wouldn't know that this has been sent by Uber verified sender ID or by any other type of sender ID. So, and it's going to be hard, as Joanna said, to, especially for end-to-end encryption, to enforce this. To top it off is the fact that now there's the pricing models in place. So this potentially will give rise to these kind of fraudulent activities. Okay. How can we monetize WhatsApp? It's WhatsApp. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, this is now a free market. Everybody's offering the same service, right? So this happens across the world. I mean, you have multiple restaurants, you know. How can you provide additional value? That is the thing that we need to look at. So how can SMS be more, or any type of native messaging, and I will stress on the native messaging, give more value to the customer, you know? And then it becomes, again, as we mentioned earlier, a pricing war strategy, you know? So that's how you can monetize this. I mean, that's the reality. Something to keep in mind is we travel a lot. I mean, I travel a lot. I don't travel only in Europe. I travel across, right? So WhatsApp is data. I don't usually have data in countries where, I mean, data is not found everywhere, sorry. You know, so you find yourself sometimes SMS is the only actually message that you can receive, you know? So also this can bring more value. Again, I would stop here. I mean, I would always keep in mind the different type of use cases. If we're talking about O2P messaging, or we're talking about additional type of use cases like the notification that we mentioned earlier, promotions, etc., etc. So all this needs to be properly analyzed, right, and come up with a proper monetization strategy for the operator. Sorry, John, I stopped reading.
Oh, no, yeah, I think, yeah, it's so very valid what you're saying. I wouldn't to, I think, say the same, that we see as in order to, so WhatsApp clearly sees a value in offering differentiated pricing for differentiating use cases, which now being a direct competitor to SMS, I think mobile operators even more so have to consider and that they will have to face, especially in the markets where the WhatsApp penetration is very high, competition from this very fast growing OTT. Yeah.
So I appreciate we're running over. So
yes, we are.
there's a final question I want to ask, and it's to really give everybody on the call some key takeaways. So if perhaps if you can just be a bit more a little more succinct, but essentially beyond flash calls, beyond WhatsApp, RCS, there's a growing trend of newer bypass techniques and wholesale fraud types, right? So lastly, what proactive steps can an M&O and the brands alike take?
Yeah, I think technology is a key piece, but probably Ron will talk about this more. But I also want to talk about the industry. We are in this very fragmented, and there are a lot of players that these days, in order to find a niche to survive, they are turning into fraud and bad behaviors. I think some good practices that the operators can take is to really make sure they enter the partnerships with the right partners, the partners that have the same objective in mind, and that is to continue growing SMS as a sustainable channel for brands to use for business communication. And that means also a bit more control, enforcement, and regulation imposed for presenting these bad behaviors. And we've seen it in some markets already. I think we see in a lot of now requests for proposals or contracts with operators. They are applying certain rules for aggregators to follow, and with penalties or disconnection clauses if those are abused, or if those rules are not followed. I think we have to also bring here the recent announcement from BT and the changes on the UK market. So BT has announced a set of rules that they have implemented for their aggregator partners to follow, and they have been very clear, as well as the other UK operators, that are limiting the number of partners. So I always like to say that without enforcement, we only have words. So I think the best practices and the codes of conduct we very often speak on these sessions, they have to finally start being enforced. But I think technology as well, maybe Ron would like to cover it, so I leave it to you.
It's always important to have the right technology in place, right? As you mentioned earlier, it's not only just to have the strategy, you need to employ the strategy, you have to deploy the strategy. And to deploy it, you have to have the right type of solution, so what I also like to add to what John is saying is obviously what is important, and we've seen this again from different speeches we were on. So you need to bring as much as possible the brand as closer as possible to the operator. This will give a lot of value. Apart from the fraudulent activities, you can have direct negotiations, commitment, relationships, and all these types of things. Finally, obviously, if you want to connect aggregators, make sure that these are the trusted aggregators. You need to make sure that they are connected to a centralized platform, because we've been in this business for a long time now. I've seen a lot of networks where you have multiple connections across the network, and it's a nightmare, especially for the engineering team, to have proper solution, proper monitoring in place, proper analysis in place. So it's important that all these connections are found in one place, okay? And then you can, on top of that, obviously add different type, put the enforcement in place, and add different type of business rules. As I mentioned, now we have like the categorization plus business rules. There's the detection, there's the filtering. You can apply sender ID registration mechanisms, content registration, URL registration. So again, technology is important, all right? So important for controlling, okay, and managing your business, and then obviously the revenues will grow.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks. I think that concludes a real insightful session. So thanks to everybody who's attending or and viewed and participated, asked some great questions. Thanks to you, Joanna, and yourself, Ron. And that's it from HAUD. Of course, if you have any further questions, do reach out to us, either Joanna or Ron directly, or anyone at HAUD. Let's hand back to the Carrier community team. Thanks again.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this great discussion. It was very interesting to listen. And thank you everyone who joined us and watched us live. Also, this session will be available on replay very soon on our CC Media portal. So check it out. And all the best until next time.